Hi there, everybody. Season's greetings, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the college football playoff. And this year is the first year where there's no BCS Bowl Championship Series. There's no more computers picking teams based on a bunch of crazy strung out polls in the hopes that there's only one or two undefeated teams. And in years past, when all the undefeated teams would be bunched up at the top of the rankings at the end of the year, we had to leave out an undefeated team or somebody who won a big conference. We had to leave them out. So we developed this 14 playoff to dispel all of the controversy that's created with the computers, and then having so many undefeated teams, or 4 one-loss teams, or 6 one-loss teams, and then a school who is from a smaller conference who's undefeated. So they gave this committee the job of selecting the 4 best teams in football. And at no point in time did they say, I want you to select an undefeated team or all the undefeated teams and then use the remaining slots to fill in for the best team, 2-team, 3-team in football, but make sure that there's 4 teams at the end of the season. So being undefeated doesn't mean anything other than the nostalgia of what it used to be. Now, if Alabama was undefeated, you have to say there's no way they could be left out. They play in a way too strong of a conference. After you get out of the SEC, because we know the SEC is really stacked, and I'm an Ohio State fan, and I'm willing to admit that. Once you get past the SEC, really, you just can't say that. If you have a Big Ten team, a Pac-12 team, an ACC team, if you have these teams in the other 4 from the 5 power conferences struggling, if they're struggling, they're usually judged accordingly. So usually the team that's leading in the SEC is held to a different standard. Now, I'm not saying SEC bias, but they do play a tougher schedule. With that being said, I'm getting some flack from some people online because I'm making some statements about the Final 4 and what I think they should be selected as. Now, as a fan, everybody knows that I love the Buckeyes, and so people are naturally going to say, "Oh, of course, Rich wants the Buckeyes to be in the playoff." Well, of course, I'd love for that to happen, but to be real, you gotta be as objective as possible. And I feel that nobody else that I've really had this conversation with is being objective at all. They're actually being quite unreasonable. And I'll go ahead and I'll start why I made this video. Number one, Florida State won the national championship last year. They were really good last year. And I'm saying last year as the focal point of Florida State football. This year they have won some very sloppy games against extreme mediocre competition. They got bailed out at the end of a Notre Dame game where they should have had a loss. 1 interception away from something in Miami, and you have to give Florida State credit for having the gumption and the ability to win those games, but they are no way, shape, or form anywhere near the top 6 teams in this country. They're not a garbage football team altogether, but they're definitely not top 6. 3 weeks ago, when Florida State was number 1 in the playoff selection committee's rankings, They won their football game that week very sloppily, and Alabama, with one loss, passed them in the rankings, and Florida State dropped to number 2. The next week, Florida State won another very sloppy game, and Oregon, which is a one-loss team, passed them in the rankings, and Florida State dropped to 3. And then last week, we all know that TCU, which is a one-loss team in the Big 12, who lost to another top 6 team, Baylor, they went from 5 and jumped all the way up to 3, and Florida State dropped to 4. So as of last week, 3 one-loss teams decided by this committee that Florida State was not better than them. And Ohio State's quarterback last week during the game against the team up north, and that's Michigan for you people that don't know what the team up north is, they lost our Heisman candidate freshman quarterback, J.T. Barrett, in the third quarter of our football game. And all week, everybody's been saying that Wisconsin was going to run all over Ohio State. They were going to beat Ohio State, and that it was going to be Alabama, Oregon, TCU, and Florida State in the Final Four, and it was all said and done. Well, something happened this evening that threw a wrench in the gears of this whole I'm unbeaten and I deserve to do this and blah, 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 yakety smackety. First and foremost, if Alabama, Oregon, and TCU can pass Florida State while those teams are all winning, and the committee looks at Florida State's wins and go, these are garbagey wins, these are not high-quality wins, you are not a power football team, then last night, which is still tonight, on Saturday night, when Ohio State beat Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game 59-0, while down south, Florida State barely beat Georgia Tech 37-35. If we gave Alabama, Oregon, and TCU, well, you're playing better and you definitely are a stronger team than Florida State, and you jump them up, then you have to give Ohio State the exact same credit. You got to give them the exact same credit and say, you know what? You're a one-loss team, but you just did something that's never happened in the nation before, and that is shut out somebody in a conference championship game. And Ohio State shut out the number 2 ranked defense, the number 1 rusher and Heisman frontrunner, held him to 76 yards. We beat them in special teams. We beat them in offense with a third-string sophomore quarterback, and we crushed them and shut them out on defense. Absolutely no way, not going to happen, would anybody ever get my vote for Florida State to go to the playoffs just because they won all of their games. Because these are the teams in the top, that the standards that these teams in the top are being held to are not because of being undefeated. If that was true, Florida State would still be number 1, and they are not number 1. Florida State would lose to probably almost every person in the top 10 of the college football rankings. Miami, if they had a do-over, would probably beat Florida State 8 out of 10 times. Notre Dame would probably beat them another 8 out of 10 times. This is a very subpar team in a very, very subpar conference. And, a lot of people can type out a message or, get into a war or, of Facebook posts and Twitter posts or whatever. So I put the stats out all for you to hear and see. It's indisputable. If it's good for 3 other teams, it should be good for Ohio State too. And I can tell you what, any team that Florida State goes up against, that team is going to crush Florida State, and we're supposed to watch the 4 best teams play in a playoff to be the best team in college football. And I do not give a crap because Florida State is not the best team in college football. It's not the second best. It's not the third best. I might put them sincerely up there, maybe anywhere between 8 and 12. They don't deserve to go to the playoffs this year. So, there's my rant. And, some of this was for Chuck Lonick, who was arguing with me, and some of this was in response to a question that another fellow shipmate, Rusty Hop, had posted. But most definitely, Florida State doesn't deserve to be in the playoffs merely because they went undefeated. Thanks a lot, and everybody have a happy holidays, and I'll be sure to be making posts tomorrow when the college football playoff selection committee makes their selections. So we'll see you tomorrow. Go Buckeyes, by the way.